Engelsman is a pastor, a preacher, an event planner, and a theologian, and she has blogged and written articles on worship and brings more than 35 years of experience and training to this webinar. I know she's also a musician. She plays the piano very well. I've participated in worship with her several times or many times, and she's very gifted in that way too. So she's active in worship, and Joy is also one of our worship ministry's endorsed coaches, which is something new that we are promoting and have. You can find more about that on our worship ministry's website. We'll put the address up there later. You probably all have it too. But Joy may be mentioning that and how the endorsed coaches can also be of assistance in this topic that we're going to talk about today on mentoring. This may be just the first mentoring webinar that we do, because the topic is so large and so broad, and Joy gets real excited about it. So I think there's much more that she can share, but that would probably be after the holidays, after Christmas. So Joy, I think today and right now, I'm just going to turn it over to you for your teaching. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Diane. And it's high noon in Denver, Colorado. So greetings to y'all wherever you might be in this world. I'm so glad that you're here to join us today to talk together about mentoring. I want to tell you a little bit about how this project got started. Joyce Borger, who's the director of worship ministries here, as many of you know, she asked me to investigate this role of how mentoring is happening in worshiping communities. In her travels around Canada and the US, she was seeing some pretty unique ideas, some really exciting concepts of people trying and practicing some things, but also hearing lots of questions. How do we engage more people of our congregations or our worshiping communities? How do we engage them in this practice of worship leading? Now, Joyce also knew I was very interested in the subject. I attended Denver Seminary, which continues to this day to have a very intensive and robust program for training and mentoring. And so it engaged me at the time I was a student, and continues to assist me in my life journey as I think about training and mentoring. And I'll tell you a little bit about Laura Flanders, who's the current director there at Denver Seminary. And she's assisted me also in learning more, continuing that journey of understanding mentoring. I have to admit this, I'm a very communal kind of person. I know that's partly related to being an extrovert, I get that. But it's not just that. I also believe that God gifts both introverts and extroverts in ways that can help them admire and engage in and participate in communal life. And in addition to that, I had a unique privilege of growing up on the mission field, in which communal living was just a given. So that shaped a bit of who I am and the value that I have for how we act one with another and help each other along this journey of life. So when Joyce asked, I gladly took her list and added to it and reached out to a bunch of people. Now, because you're in on this now too, I want to tell you what it was I said to them as we started looking into this topic. It might then trigger something in your mind of, hey, I could help and I've got some stories to tell. So here's what I said to people when I reached out to them. Hi, I'm doing a research project for the worship ministries of my denomination, the Christian Reformed Church. Now, not all these people were Christian Reformed, so sometimes I had to explain that. But I'm exploring best practices, stories, advice on how we raise up more people to lead in worship. Now, this is going to include exploring how we pass on information, how we donate power and leadership to others, how we hone skills, and how we shape character with one another. And I'm also interested in why some worshiping communities seem to have invested more in mentoring relationship and practices. Others haven't so much. Why is that? And how our given cultures, maybe it's ethnic culture, geographic culture, other cultures of our worshiping communities impact our mentoring. And then how do our mentoring systems impact our culture? And I do believe they do. So where are we on this project? Well, we're sort of still at the beginning. Maybe that's why we have this really exciting title, The Mentoring Project. That's where it is. It's still a project, and we're inviting you to join us on it. So that's why Diana suggested join us with the sidebar, the chat, and you're going to be given the emails and all that you need to get a hold of us with your own ideas. if you're taking notes and at the end you go, I really would love to share this with Joy, I'd be very happy to receive them, be honored to see what you might have to say about this subject. Humans are imitators. We tend to do things in life the way they happen to us or the way we've seen them done. We teach the way we were taught. We lead the way we were led. We love sometimes the way we were loved. And we mentor the way we were mentored. This is our default as humans, to imitate. Unless we consciously consider, evaluate, and implement another way of doing life, we tend to default into the ways we have had these things happen to us. If we want to change that, we have to be proactive about it. We have to think about it. We have to examine the way it's happened to us. And so that's why I want to start a conversation about mentoring and asking you, what were your own mentoring experiences? What does the word mentoring sound like to you? How have those mentoring experiences shaped how you think about the word, about the practice? How have they helped or hindered your journey of life? Maybe you can think about this in terms of specific worship mentoring, but maybe you've got to go a little bit more broadly and think about your life mentoring. How has that concept of mentoring been part of your life? So again, I'm going to ask you to use this sidebar and pop in some words that you may think of other than the word mentor, because I'm going to keep using that one, because there are mentoring things that happen to us, but other titles, other terms are ones that we might use, and that will help us kind of grab onto this idea of what it means to help one another in life. So, what images come to mind when I talk about mentoring? What people, if you're willing to share those names on the chat bar, that would be super. What negative, positive, engaging, fearful, what happens to you when you hear the word mentoring? You see, there's no escaping the fact that all of us at one point or another in our life have been mentored in that broad understanding of the word. And when we get to definitions here, we're going to realize that we're going to try to bring in that definition so it isn't quite so broad. And particularly, we're going to talk about the intentionality of the relationships. But all of us have had people in our lives that have spoken to it, that have helped us along the way. And I'm seeing some of these great words here. Thank you so much for participating. But I'm going to go with this presumption for today, that as leaders, and most of you are on here because you serve in some role as a leader, you have influence over others, you are probably engaging in this mentoring project or listening to it because you and I want more ideas of how we can learn to be better mentors. And I just got to let you know, that makes us normal. That makes us bigger than average, because we are the normal group out there. We want to know more about how to be good mentors. You see, there are way more books out there about how to be a mentor than there are about how to be a mentee. Now, when I think about it, I'm not quite sure what to do with that, because I know that I think I fall into that category. Maybe you do too. We really do want to do this thing better. But doesn't it make us sometimes wonder why we're always wondering how we can pass on all the stuff we know, and there just isn't quite as much information about how we can learn to be good receivers, good listeners, good learners of all that others might have to pass on to us. So this mentoring thing does have a full circle concept to it, but currently as it's being practiced, we're in the normal group that says, I really want to learn how to be a better mentor. As we continue with this mentoring project, I'm really going to work hard and listen hard for ways in which we can continue to close that circle and be good at both teaching, leading, advising, consulting with others, counseling them, seeing these wonderful words you're putting up here, as well as being good listeners and learners. All right, in our time together for today, I'm going to attempt to explore 3 questions. Although, to be honest, exploring might be a bit too optimistic. I'm going to try to introduce you to the categories, the questions that we've been working on in this project. And we're going to dive deep into a few pieces, but some of it I'm going to skim right over and save for a future conversation. So first of all, I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. Diane's been so helpful teaching me how to do this. And so here we go. Share the screen like this. And if the cursor will move, there it is. And there's the top of my screen. There's my email. You can also get that from Diane after this time. Here are the topics of mentoring that we want to look at. And this is what I've been asking people in my investigations, in my interviews with them. What is mentoring? And that's going to be the main question. We're just going to stop with that one today. But what are the forms? What are our own experiences? How do those color our expectations? How is mentoring different from other relationships? And secondly, what then to why? Why is mentoring an important topic, especially for those of us who lead in worship? And we're going to hope to eventually get to a definition of mentoring that's specific to worship leadership. And the third category, third topic is how some of our colleagues are engaging in mentoring practices. And I hope to tell more stories in the future. And I'd love to tell your story in this as well. Okay, so what is mentoring? Mentoring is a very popular topic right now, hot button topic, but it has an ancient background. Some of you may know this. In the stories of ancient Greece, mentor was a person. Mentor was a friend to Odysseus. And when Odysseus went off to fight in the Trojan War, he asked his friend, mentor, to take care of his son. It was mentor's job to pass on wisdom and how to live life to Odysseus's son to help the young man grow up rightly. You can see then the connection between that name, mentor, and our modern concept of mentoring, passing on information, wisdom, and helping others grow up. But yes, this is a very trendy topic today. Lots and lots of books out there about it, conversations going on in all avenues of life. And we are talking about it in terms of worship, but I think it's helpful if we're going to understand what mentoring might look like in its broadest scope to see how it's also happening in the rest of the world. Again, some of those titles that we might think about will come up as I tell you stories of other areas of life in which we see mentoring happening. The business world. Now, you've probably seen books out there, articles in all sorts of newspapers about business mentoring. I know that, for instance, the Denver Small Business Group has a whole list of experienced business owners who help new business owners start their businesses up, to do it legally, to pay their taxes properly, to learn about marketing strategies. They just help them all get started. We don't call them mentors. Do you know what we might call business people who do this? Do we have words for that? In education, we talk about students who have excelled in a class helping students who maybe aren't doing so well, who are struggling. Maybe a student who passed the class sits in on study hall and does homework with someone else. We have specific terms in education that we talk about those mentors. Or some of you know the Kids Hope Ministry. We do call those folks mentors, these adults who come into the lives of kids who are struggling and give them kind of a holistic support and help and encouragement to their lives. In the church community, and not specific to worship here, but in the church community, we have always had people who have walked along the faith journey. For those who are new, maybe recently introduced to the love and grace of God and received it into their own lives, we have people who walk alongside with them. We have other names for them. Do you know, I mean, if you know some of these names, maybe you can continue to type them in there. Maybe when people go through a dark night of the soul and have questions about life and concerns, we have people who come alongside of them at that time. Maybe you're thinking about those terms right now. These are coaches, teachers, spiritual directors, counselors. And in their book, Connections, by Paul Stanley and Robert Clinton, and I'm going to admit this is a rather old book, but it's kind of a very simple primer on the role of mentoring in people's lives. They go into detail on all of these different terminologies and how they might connect with each other, but also the boundaries that we can find between these different roles. The model hero one would be one in which there is not quite a personal relationship, but someone you admire from afar and you learn from them just by observing how they do their life. Now, the reason I put them up in front of you here is because sometimes the word mentor gets in the way of the relationship that we need and desire for our own growth, or that someone else has asked us for their growth. And mentor means different things to different people. So if we're not specific enough, if we don't talk about what we mean by that word, we can find ourselves a little bit confused here. For instance, imagine if you asked someone to be your mentor in worship leading, but you were thinking that that person would help you learn to play your instrument much better, coach you, teach you to be a better pianist, guitar player, drummer, whatever it might be. But when you said mentor to this other person, they thought that you meant help me in my spiritual life. And so they presumed that they were now your spiritual counselor and your guide. So you get to your first meeting and you have one assumption, they have another assumption, and you're going to find out that you're actually probably getting into conflict with each other because you presumed such different things about the relationship, even though you all use the word mentor. So like I said, this makes me really concerned and eager to see us make sure we define terms and explain what we mean when we get into a relationship with someone about mentoring. And before we would even start to define and develop systems of mentoring in our churches, that we make sure that we are not having one understanding of the word, and the people around us, the council, the other leadership, the people involved have a totally different understanding of it. We're going to now look at some definitions, and this is going to be hopefully good for us because we'll start to narrow what we mean. Here's the danger, of course. After this small group leaves and we go out to our various places, we're going to go with now a newfound understanding, maybe a baseline of what mentoring is, but the folks out there won't. So maybe this little exercise of helping us think about what mentoring was in our past and exploring that and understanding that it's different, maybe you'll need to replicate that in your own setting as you help other folks come to an understanding of mentoring. Don't just dive in with, let's mentor, but what is their previous understanding? How does it color how they might mentor in the future? And step back in order that we might learn it together. All right, I'm going to share my screen with you again here. And there we go. Definitions of mentoring. Here's a simple one. Mentoring is to advise or train someone, especially a younger colleague. Here's another one. Mentorship is a relationship in which a more experienced or more knowledgeable person helps to guide a less experienced or less knowledgeable person. Important sentence coming up. The mentor may be older or younger than the person being mentored, but he or she must have a certain area of expertise. I'm coming back to that sentence in a moment. Here is the definition put forward in that book I just told you about, Connecting. Mentoring is a relational experience through which one person empowers another by sharing God-given resources. And the definition used by Denver Seminary in their training and mentoring department. Mentoring is a relational practice in which there is intentional pursuit toward growth and transformation. Now you can see where Denver Seminary began with learning from Clinton and Stanley there, but took a little bit of a different tack and some important words in there. The intentionality of the relationship is one of the pieces of defining it as a mentoring relationship rather than just a loosely a friendship or other type of connecting relationship. And secondly, in the Stanley and Clinton definition there, you see it's about sharing God-given resources. It's kind of a stopgap there. It's a closed circle almost. One person empowers another, sharing God-given resources. And so one of the things I like about the Denver Seminary definition is that it has an outward thrust, a pursuit toward growth and transformation. And I think it's intentional that that doesn't say for the persons involved, but that it has the possibility that you can think of that growth and transformation larger than just the people. It might be the institution that also grows and is transformed by that. I told you I was going to come back to that second one there with the second sentence of this. The mentor may be older or younger than the person being mentored. That's important, especially for those of us that are so concerned in our churches right now that we engage in intergenerational worship, that we involve all of God's family in the leading and participation of worship. However, when you use the word mentor, we are generally saying that it's an older to younger relationship. After all, that's where the word came from, right? An older man taking care of a younger man. So our assumptions in the social setting and when we use the word, those assumptions cling to the word itself. So we have to be careful that when we use that term and that title, mentor, most people are going to presume that it's an older to younger relationship. And if we want to do what so many of you are already doing and wanting to do, that is honor the ideas, the skills, the abilities, the experiences of younger people and have those be transferred in another direction. If we want to do that, we might have to choose to use some of those other terms that I've previously talked about. We have to be intentional about it and aware that the term mentor might just rub wrong on people. They might not understand the concept. Let me give you an example of how this might work. Let's say you have a woman in your congregation who has, for most of her life, participated in worship by singing in choirs. She has a marvelous voice. She participated for, many, many years until, the busyness of kids and job. So she hasn't been doing that for a number of years now. So, but she's been busy, and lo and behold, she's retired, empty nester, and she'd like to re-engage and use the voice God gave her to participate in worship leading again. Problem is, you don't have a church choir anymore. So her style of singing, her gift, feels like it no longer has a place. How might you engage that person in worship leadership when it seems like so many things have passed her by? Might it be that someone could mentor her in the ways of singing that now your church is doing, the stylistic methods that allow you to sing differently than choral methods would? Yes, I think that's very possible. But I think you might run into some maybe emotional rub if you ask a younger person to mentor that person. But how about if you said, and maybe she would even ask for this, is there someone who could coach me? Because I hear you guys sing now, and I think there's a different style involved. I still have a good voice, and I think my voice could be retrained. Could someone train me, teach me, coach me? Those are great words to use that would honor perhaps a younger person coming alongside this person and bringing that skill level to them. So let's be very aware of the term mentor and that it comes coded in lots of baggage for people with their own histories, their own assumptions about the word. But Yahoo, it also has so many other titles and terms along with it that will allow us to find what works best in our terminology, in our conversations with people, to engage them in these relationships. All right, I think we talked about what is mentoring, but what we haven't done, and we're not going to do today because I'm going to ask for your help, what is mentoring specific to the worshiping world? How could we make a definition? Maybe we could glean off of the Denver Seminary one or the Connections one. Maybe we'll do something totally different. But what would that definition sound like to us if it were related directly to worship? And that's going to be kind of future thinking here, maybe in a future webinar. But I'm looking forward to maybe some of you suggesting some things on that. Why mentor, right? Let's move on. Why mentor? As I have conducted these interviews and talked with a lot of different people about why they spend time and effort in the practice of mentoring or relationship building or teaching, whatever title they use, I hear from them various reasons why they do all this extra work. And of course, I've added a number of my own reasons. I tend to think theologically. I'm a theology geek. So some of these reasons are things I'm pondering and wondering about as they engage in the theological life, the various aspects of that. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just drop on you some of the quick answers to that question. Why mentor? And then we're going to dive more deeply into one of those. Again, I hope in a future webinar with you to dive deeply into some of these ones that I'm just dropping. So here we go. I think there are biblical reasons why we engage in mentoring. We can look at some of the relationships we see in scripture and see that those folks are mentoring each other. Elijah's mantle or Elisha cast, right? That concept of passing it on. Moses passing on leadership to Joshua. Elizabeth mentoring, caring for, teaching, consulting, counseling with Mary, as both of them have these unexpected pregnancies. And then there's Paul and his team, and I stole that little phrase from this wonderful book by my friend Ryan Lockesmo. I'll read a little bit from it later. Paul and all of his many relationships that happen. All right, so biblically, yes. Ecclesiastically, and as in thinking about the church. After all, Ephesians 4 verse 12 tells us what is the purpose that we have as leaders in the church. We do this to build up, to equip, that's the word there, to equip the body of Christ. And the rest of the story of God is full of examples and laws and principles about the community of God and how we live together in that community. Telling one another the stories of God and helping shape one another. The goal of using all the gifts God has given us for the glory of Jesus Christ, for the sake of God's kingdom, right? Mentoring can also be thought of in terms of the doctrine of sanctification, as we assist one another, all under the leadership of the Holy Spirit, the guidance of the Holy Spirit, to grow up under this one who is Christ, head of us, head of the church. I think we can also find some Trinitarian theology here, the unity and diversity and interplay of one another's gifts in our mentoring relationships. I think that another angle on the ecclesiology would be how mentoring brings out both unity and diversity in the life of the church. It binds us together, but it also creates avenues for different voices, different styles, different cultures to rise to leadership roles and present them in worship, a unique and different expression of worship of God. Yeah, a lot of different reasons. And as I said, I'm not diving deep into those, but I think they're all true, and hopefully we'll come back to them. Today we are going to spend our time talking, though, about a very practical reason why we need to be more intentional about mentoring. And to do that, I'm going to give you a theme song. And I am going to just maybe apologize to start with, because this theme song, if I do this right, this theme song is going to stick with you. I'm sorry. And stick with you and hopefully irritate you just a little bit, enough to help you remember this very important reason of why we mentor. Some of you may remember the old game, Name That Tune, where people would say, I can name that tune in 3 notes. I can name that tune in whatever. I'm going to give you 6 notes. I will hum them. And the first person to type in the correct title wins the grand prize. So get your fingers ready on your keyboards. And all of you who've been practicing already writing down there, yep, you're all ready for this. You ready? I'm going to give you these notes. Ready? Here goes. I am looking for the correct title. I will not give points for the first line, but some of you might want to type that in because it'll help you get to the title. Here we go. Do, 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 do. There's 6 notes. Do I see any typing? Anybody there? I might have to remember how old I am and that for 35 years, oh my goodness, some of you, yes, I see it only takes a spark. Yeah, that is the first line. It only takes a spark to get a fire going. And of course, the grand prize is simply this, that now I know you're as old as I am. And it is an old song, but it only takes a spark is not the title. What I'm after here is the title, Pass It On, right? The reason we do mentoring is of the necessity that we pass it on. We pass what has been given to us, we pass it on. And of course, you know this. This is biblical and theological. Doesn't Paul say, I pass on to you what was first given to me, that our Lord Jesus Christ, and then he goes on to institute the Lord's Supper for us who continue 2,000 years later to receive that practice, right? Let's think of other worship practices too, and the knowledge that has been given to us and the privileges that we have received and the training and engagement in worship that so many of us have been honored and enjoyed receiving ourselves. We are to pass it on. Here's the deal, folks. You and I are replaceable. We better be. So Ryan Lacasmo, in his book, Paul and His Team, he asks us to imagine what the world might be like without ourselves in it, what our even small worlds in the church might be like without ourselves in it. Can you imagine it, he writes? I'll read from this here. It's not natural for us to think about replacing ourselves. To do that, we must have realism to acknowledge that we're mortal, maturity to admit that we're replaceable, and the foresight to find and prepare successors to take our place. Very important. We got to be mature about it. We got to have the foresight. We got to be humble enough to admit that this is the truth. All right, so I have sometimes referred to this as the Mack truck incentive. Sorry, but this is how I do it. I ask myself, if I were to meet a Mack truck unexpectedly on the highway, would worship at my church be able to continue? Would there be at least some continuity of music and theology and art and the thoughts that have been passed on to me? Will I have passed them on in enough way so that, yes, it will be maybe a glitch for a little bit, but things will go on? Now, a friend said to me, Joy, that's a bit dramatic. Maybe you shouldn't be quite so fatalistic about it. Why don't you say it this way? Let's call it the lottery, win the lottery scenario. In which case, if you were to win the lottery tomorrow, would worship continue? And I said to her, but wait a minute. I don't buy lottery tickets, and I'm probably talking to a bunch of people for whom that's not a common practice. And the fact of the matter is I do drive on the highways, especially here in Denver these days, where life is a little bit more dangerous. So I know it's blunt, I know it's a little bit gory, but it does help me remember that this leadership that I might enjoy, positional or influential leadership in worship, is something that is a gift to me to be passed on. Pass it on. Because, folks, it's not about me. It's not about you. Here's the truth. This does happen. Some years ago, a Presbyterian congregation in the Denver area had a very healthy two-pronged worship service. They had a contemporary service, and the second service, or the first service was traditional, and the second service was contemporary. And they had two leaders for that contemporary service. I'll call them Tim and Terry. Terry was paid staff and Tim was a volunteer. They were a great team. They engaged the congregation. One of my good friends was a member of that church. And I remember on Mondays and Tuesdays when she would come, so invigorated by worship, I was sometimes jealous how she spoke so warmly of these two worship leaders who brought the presence of Christ in a very real way to their worshiping time. These two guys co-wrote songs together that they presented to the congregation, and they just had formed such a beautiful family there together. Well, Kerry got an offer from another church, and so he took that call. And then the senior pastor of the entire church took another call. So there was, a little bit of vacancy going on in the church. And Tim continued to be the paid staff person who planned and led that contemporary worship service. He gave stability and organization to worship, even while guest preachers kind of came and went. Excuse me. Until Memorial Weekend of that year. Tim took advantage of the gorgeous Colorado Rockies and our beautiful weather out here to go for a hike. No one knows for sure what happened. He slipped. He tried to climb somewhere he couldn't have, but he fell off the edge of a very high cliff. This was a devastating blow to that second congregation. The church's board tried to make things work. They hired the person who'd been working for the traditional service to take over worship planning for the second service. After all, in their estimation, a musician is a musician, songs are songs, worship leaders are worship leaders. You can exchange one for the other. It mattered not that that person had no information, no continuity, no connectivity from the first to the second service previous to this horrible accident. So this friend of mine who was responsible for creating the PowerPoints, yes, that's what they did back then, creating all the PowerPoints for the songs, she continued to do that role, but she started to notice something. There was a different kind of thinking behind the selection of songs, and she couldn't quite put her finger on it till a few weeks into it. She saw the list and she realized that rather than apply any kind of theology or thoughtfulness to the content of the sermon or the word of God being presented and choosing songs for that, this new worship planner for the contemporary service was simply starting at the top and alphabetically choosing 5 songs for that week, and the next week starting at the next list and continuing alphabetical down the list. Yes. And then on top of that, of course, the songs that Tim and Terry had written together for that congregation that had brought kind of a unity to the people, no one else knew how to play those songs or sing them. And they are lost now to that church and to anyone else, not published, not recovered. In many ways, that church has had a continual loss. That service never recovered. And it's a sore spot to this day. It's very sad. So, in essence, that all died with Tim. So yes, folks, there are practical reasons. And it's not always as dramatic as the loss to death. Maybe people move or things happen in life where you cannot continue in that role. Is someone standing there ready to move forward? Have we been responsible? This is an area of yes, responsibility on our part as leaders. I remember working for Youth for Christ some years ago in event planning, and we were responsible for these huge youth events. And our director would say to us, "So what's your backup plan?" And we would have to explain the backup plan to our plan. And as soon as we were done saying that, he would turn to us again and say, "And what's the backup plan to your backup plan?" Brian Lacasmo says again here, at some point, whatever influence we have been given will be handed off to someone else. Someone will take over for us whatever leadership role we currently occupy. If there's no one waiting for the baton, we risk squandering our influence. I'll just say this, we risk squandering everything that was given to us. If there's someone waiting, but they have no idea what to do, they don't know how to even start running in order for that baton to be cleanly passed to them. They're just way back there in the wings, waiting for someone to help them, mentor them, encourage them, teach them, train them. That's just a total loss if we haven't recognized them and invited them into the journey. We have to make sure, says Lacasmo, that there are people waiting to run the next leg of the race, and we have to make sure that they are running alongside of us before we hand them the baton. Now, David Norris, who is the worship pastor at Wellspring Anglican Church here in Denver, he understands this principle really well. He said to me, mentoring is so important because it fosters humility. It challenges some of the ongoing things, the common temptations for worship leaders today, both for worship leaders and, frankly, the temptations for our congregations as well, especially those churches that like personality-driven leadership. Norris says this, that some churches don't encourage mentoring because as they see it, we are paying this person, X person, whom we really like and is super cool, we are paying them a lot of money to do this job. We don't want to see the learners up there. That's an issue of humility, lack of it, says Norris. David also sees very practical rationale for why he fosters these mentoring relationships at Wellspring. He puts it this way: I have a very healthy theology of Sabbath rest. I believe God calls us to that rest. And in order for him to get Sabbath rest, he must raise up and train others to do the job that he does and to do it every bit as good as he does for the sake of the worshiping community he serves, for the sake of Jesus. That's how he sees it. And then he says this, he said this to me, it was just really beautiful. He said, you know, I think about how I could spend my life. And I could spend it investing my time and energy becoming even a better guitar player and a really great singer, writing amazing songs. I could be the best worship leader ever. Or I could invest my time in the lives of others, passing on what I've learned, so that years from now, I can say, I have mentored 50 people. And in mentoring them, I taught them the good principles of mentoring so that they mentored 50 people. And those 50 people mentored 50 people. David loves to think of that exponential idea of duplicating ourselves in worship leadership for the sake of Christ, for the sake of the church. I was really inspired by that conversation. And hopefully someday I'll get to introduce you to David. He can tell you a little bit more about the practical side of how he does that. So why? I hope that little song, "It Only Takes a Spark," gets embedded in your brain enough to irritate you, and you keep asking yourself now, what am I doing to pass it on, pass it on, pass it on? Okay, we want to take some time to answer some of your questions. We've got about 15 minutes, a little bit more maybe. We do want to end on time to honor your time here. But if you have some questions, Diane can read them there. And hopefully we'll also get a chance here to hear some stories. I know that's kind of hard because you can't talk on here, but if you want to write them, or in future, if you want me to interview you, we'll try to do that another time. Diane, I see you there. You can help us with some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Joy. That was really so inspiring and convicting, actually. I really learned a lot from your presentation, so thank you so much for that. And I do want to acknowledge that we had at least 6 people who won the grand prize and did get the title, Pass It On, correct, typed in there very quickly when you started to sing. Yesterday, Joy did this with us. A couple of us here when we were kind of doing a little practice webinar, and I was stuck. I could not come up with a name even though I could hum the whole song. So you guys did great. Go ahead and type your questions into the chat box now. Joy's here. This is a great time for her to actually address them and answer them. We don't have any questions yet, Joy. I think everybody's probably just still thinking about all of the stuff that you were talking about because it was very convicting and very interesting. I know we talked about doing something later too with, something more specific, but did you have another story that you wanted to share? I think you said.
Sure. Maybe while some of you are thinking about it, I'd like to tell you a great, just brief story that I received from Cindy Gritters, who works with high school students in Iowa. And she shared with me that some of her best practices of how their church is engaging in a system of worship mentoring. Here's what she says. Typically, we have the high school students or seniors, or they could be young college age, apply for a summer internship. So this is an internship program in worship at their church. They send in their resumes. And so first of all, by doing that, these teenagers get experience in writing resumes, and they can get some help with that. Those applications are reviewed at a February meeting by the program, music, and worship committee of the church. The person whom they select actually receives a monetary scholarship so that they'll go to the college that they're attending. But it, puts the money where their mouth is, so to speak. And that person then works under Cindy's leadership for the summer. They do basically everything that a worship leader would do. They pick songs, they talk with the pastor, they learn about theology of worship, they engage with the musicians, they just learn. I mean, there's so many nuances to our job, right? So many fingers in it in the life of the church. And so this student gets to see that experience right from the inside. It's a summer job. At the end of the summer, the worship leader intern is asked to write a paper about what they did and about their reflections on it, theological and personal feelings on what happened. And here's what Cindy says, and I love this example because remember we talked about going full circle? Here's what Cindy says about closing that circle. The paper that they receive is very insightful for the adults because they get to learn from the mindset of the teenagers as those teenagers reflect back to them what their experience was in the mentoring relationship. She says, it's been so much fun stretching these kids out of their comfort zone, getting their feet wet with church leadership. It's also neat to see our worship leaders, interns, then go out, they go to college, they go elsewhere with some confidence and experience for God to then use them in those settings there. Calvary's been blessed by the ideas, energy, and enthusiasm of our young leaders. And so thank you, Cindy Gritter, for that story and very specific example. I hope you see in it some ideas. Let's just be practical. Sometimes it takes putting a little money behind an idea, whether that means paying staff or maybe it means taking some seminars and learning some things together. I know that at the Wellspring, this situation at Wellspring Church, they do the same thing. They pay interns. It's not a lot of money, but it's a stipend enough that holds people accountable. So that's just something to consider.
Yeah, that is great. It's a great story. And they do it in the summer, which is kind of probably very convenient because a lot of their other maybe leaders leave, or like they do here in Michigan, a lot of people take vacations. And so it's a great time to have a consistent person to work with, to plan worship and to lead worship and to learn and grow with. If anybody else has any stories like that or ways that you have worked with younger people or older people, I mean, Joy has just kind of expressed that it's not necessarily older to younger relationships, but maybe even younger to older relationships. That would be interesting to hear about too. Either type them in here or let us know later. That would be really interesting. We do have a question here, Joy. I don't know if you can see it. This is from Steve. He's asking, how can I address congregational members who prefer not to spend time preparing music for offertory or prelude because they feel like I'm being paid, he then is being paid to do this, so he should do it. Any suggestions there for Steve?
Whoa, thank you for that question. That's a deeper question even than I would say systems or mentoring can address. I'm going to be maybe a little bit careful here. If I were to know this and I were your preaching pastor, I might address that in sermons that talk about, yes, grace and our mutual care for each other. That's a really interesting attitude. Maybe I might even come back and ask this. How do you know they feel this? Are they expressing this to you? And what else might be behind then? If they're saying this out loud, what's behind those feelings? Are they not feeling that their gift is worthy enough of this? Are they not sensing the privilege, the honor that it is to be part of a worshiping community? How can I address them in love and grace? But it doesn't sound like you're receiving that same amount of love and grace. So I'm kind of feeling for you on that one. The other piece of, maybe this is more technical, what does your job description say? Do you have a job description? Many times when we don't have specific job descriptions, people assume all sorts of things under the title worship leader. They actually, I think, presume a broader amount of tasks on the worship leader than they tend to do under the title pastor. Pastor can be a little bit simpler. Preach, teach, visit, done. Worship leader, prepare the PowerPoint, run the sound system, write the music, play the music, recruit the folks. I mean, come on, we could finish that list, right, all of you? So I would ask you maybe to go back and look at your own job description. Is it clear? And could you then sit with these people and show them, here is one of my jobs, and Ephesians 4 verse 12, by the way, say that one of the roles I could do best is to equip others to participate in the worship life of the church. We are blessed to have your skills in this church, and I would like so much for you to enjoy that role when I ask you to do that. Is that helpful, Stephanie? Music director, there it is. Oh yes, see, it's there. Yes, so here you're answering your own question in such a wise way here, that sometimes we might have a good job description, but it's hidden in a drawer. Nobody knows either what we're supposed to do, but they also don't know the boundary line of what we're not supposed to do. And then sometimes we end up doing these things that we're not supposed to because nobody knows that, but somebody has to get it done. And after time, you're going to be expected to do that. For instance, I'll just share this little story with you. When the first year that I had a strange title, I was Minister of Church Development. And so this number of years ago, and I sat down for my first review, and all went well until one elder said to me, well, I'd just like to offer a little constructive criticism because you have not done well in managing the church's budget. And I kind of was embarrassed and felt like, what? Okay, so if you knew me, you know that putting Joy in charge of the budget would never have been a good idea in the first place. And I thought, that's not true. Well, I just kept my mouth shut and said, thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it. Next day, went back to my office, checked my job description. Not a word about the role of managing the church budget was in there. But from that day forward, I was responsible for managing the church budget because I didn't address it and didn't say to the elders, wait a minute, guys, you've just now added to it with, it wasn't there. So it sounds like that's part of the deal here, is communicating clearly with those folks what it is you do and what it is you're not supposed to do. I hope that helps, Stephanie.
Yes, and Stephanie, you can type another question too if you would like. Joyce has a question here. How do we start or find someone to mentor without seeming to pick favorites? Does it need to be a formal program?
Great question. I want to attack this from two different angles, and maybe the first would be, how do we find mentors for ourselves? So let's look at this the upside down way before we look for who can we mentor. What are the processes we might go through when we're looking for someone to mentor us? How do we hope to get chosen by such and such a person? Do we present ourselves in a way like, I hope they pick me, and then wait for them to do that? So that might help us to recognize that there are people right around us in the wings, sort of raising their hands near us saying, I'm interested, just as we have been doing to others and hoping that they would select us for mentoring relationships. Maybe that will just kind of tickle us into thinking, hey, how do I see people around me? Then to look at it, though, exactly the way you're asking. How do we find these people, and being careful about favorites? In talking with Laura Flanders about this she's the worship, she's the training and mentoring director at Denver Seminary. And she offers some very good caution about systems of mentoring. So that's a topic I hope we can explore a little more later, because we don't have time to get into all of it. But I just want to make you aware that our systems of mentoring, while they seem so efficient to us, can often get in the way of the actual mentoring relationships. Rules and regulations and reports and who can meet with whom and who does, and all of that stuff. There's some room and some need for some of that. But if we wait for systems to tell us how to pick people and how to engage in this, that might not actually get us to where we want to be with mentoring relationships. Also, that the systems we end up choosing inform and adjust our cultures. Systems of mentoring change our culture, our body culture, our church culture. So whatever system you pick, you have to be aware that you're going to do something to the church's culture. So let's think of Cindy Gritter's example, for instance. Yeah, that's a hard one, right? These folks have to apply, and then some get chosen, but even more are not chosen. What happens with that? How does that impact the church's culture and the feelings for some of those kids that aren't chosen? That's a hard thing to think about. We got to kind of explore, what does that look like then? How do we do it without seeming to pick favorites? All right, well, this prayerfully, and step back and look for, be conscientious about what you're looking for. So if you say up front that we need someone who is gifted in music for this particular time, we're looking for a musician, and the next person who comes by is gifted in many other ways, technology and such, but music isn't the thing, then you haven't played favorites with that, because you declared ahead of time what it is you're looking for in the next mentor person. Vice versa. What if you're looking for someone who can run the very technological systems that keep everything so beautiful and connected and smooth in church? And then you get someone like Joy applying for it, who's like, I can play piano. And you're like, yeah, thanks, Joy, but not this time. We're picking someone else. Joyce, this is a hard thing, right? And many of us have experienced the pain of not being the one picked. Let me suggest that in our systems, we not just think of ourselves as the mentor, but we develop broader systems where maybe there's other people in your worship world there who can mentor one another. I know in talking to Nicole Ensing that she has a system where she's got this guitar player who he loves meeting with another kid who's learning how to play guitar. So they're a mentoring relationship. She doesn't even go into that one. She just sets that relationship up and lets it go. I'm thinking back to Kids Hope as a marvelous program. I know some of you have that in your churches. And Kids Hope, while no one person can mentor all those kids, they have a policy: one kid, one mentor. Same as it's one church, one school. They're very focused. And so if we want to mentor 20 kids in that school, we have to come up with 20 mentors. Maybe our job as the leaders is to mentor 3, 4, 5 mentors who then mentor 3, 4, 5, and we get the David Norris exponential thing happening, and we don't end up leaving folks out. Thanks, Joyce, for the question.
Awesome. So Joy, we are really running out of time, and
Oh, yeah.
I don't see any more questions. So I'm going to put up the resource list here, and would love you to just go through that briefly. If you can just see that, if you can highlight those in just the next 2 or 3 minutes as we
yes, I leave those names there. That's the beginning of a list, I hope. And again, want to invite some of you to send me your email and go ahead, just write to me and say, pick me. I have a story to tell. I want to be in on the interviews about mentoring. I can't wait then to call you and talk with you about whatever stories and experiences God has given you. You'll see on this list, there's some diversity. I'm looking for more, even more ethnic diversity. And of course, I have some more on my list that simply haven't connected with yet. In different denominations, I can't wait to tell you a little bit more about what I learned from my friend Tony Haas, who is the worship leader at Most Precious Blood Catholic Church, one of the largest parishes here in Denver, and just had great learning from him. And Brandon Washington in the Embassy Church here in Denver. It's very much an intercultural church, and Brandon is a very thoughtful person and learned a lot. I learned some very interesting things about mentoring and the African-American context, the Black church context, as he said. And that'll be fun for another session here because it's totally different than what my presumptions were about the word mentoring. And then again, start on the list of books here. The Connecting book I talked to you about, and you can see, again, that's an older book, but it's wonderfully simple and it talks about the different roles there. Paul and his team, I highly, highly recommend to you as worship leaders, maybe a gift, a Christmas present to your the pastor or to your team, and use that as a learning tool for you. Just marvelously written, and happen to know Ryan, who is an incredibly godly man and one of the most intelligent people to walk this planet, understands the New Testament very, very well. Shaped by God is a book maybe many of us have used in the past, again, honoring many of you folks who, like me, are so invested in the intergenerational concept of church and worship and God's family as multi-aged. So that book has been helpful, maybe not specifically in this particular talk, but just in overall thinking about it. Church musicians, Paul Ryan, who many of you know, leads the worship apprentices at Calvin College. He shared with me one of his papers, and I really want to appreciate Paul for that. The classic Life Together, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, wonderful tiny little book. And then just some other practical stuff. I've got a lot of other little older practical books that worship leaders have talked about in the past. If you have more ideas for me, helpful books, documents you'd like to share, I'd be so glad to receive them and honored for your participation in this mentoring project.
And yes, you can email us. You can check our worship ministry's website. You see the address there, and you see Joy's email address at the bottom of that screen as well. We want to wrap it up now and thank Joy especially for teaching us and for leading us today and for priming the pump for future, I believe, webinars on mentoring and relationships that could even grow between those of you who attended today and Joy, who's taught. It's not easy to teach this way, is it, Joy, when you're just, you know, preaching to your computer screen in a sense, knowing that there's people and faces behind it. But there are, and hopefully this will inspire some of them to email you or to check more into this whole idea of mentoring and passing it on. And it probably will be stuck in my head for a while, that song. I've changed to the last screen here because I just want to invite all of you who are attending to come next week. Next Wednesday, we have another webinar scheduled. This is going to be something totally different. We're going to do kind of a round table on how to foster a healthy worship life. And that is for you as worship leaders. Worship is your work, but worship is also your life. But you have a family or a life too as well. And so Katie Roloffs from the Washington, D.C. Church, the worship leader there, is going to host that and lead a discussion and share some stories and practical tips that she's learned about keeping a healthy family life and worship life going. So that will be next Wednesday in the morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And the way to sign up for that will be to email us that you would like to attend, because we're going to invite you into that discussion. So you will be able to talk and be seen in that roundtable small group that will involve. So email us on that. And we just, again, we thank you all for joining and for being here today. Email us if you have questions, and just have a great week. Blessings to all of you, and thank you.